So we have tonight our interactive webinar with Morten and Patricia are my guests tonight. And I'm going to ask them about their perspective and their view on AI advancements in 2025. So Morten and Patricia, you can enter the stage by muting and unmuting. And hi, welcome. Good to see you.
Thanks for having us.
Here. Hello from Canada.
Morten, you are joining us from Canada, and Patricia, you're in Switzerland?
Exactly, in Zurich.
All right. So hello and good evening, everyone. Tonight we're going to talk AI. We're going to talk about what's going to happen this year, what maybe is going to happen this year, and how we can stay ahead of things. I'd like to start with you, Morten. You've been with our conference, the UX Nordic and the Future Product Days, from the very beginning. You're both educator, speaker, futurist, and work at LinkedIn Learning. Maybe you can quickly present yourself and tell us how you keep yourself up to date with everything that's happening with UX, AI, and technology.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? I just switched the microphone
Yes,
around.
yes.
So, okay, good. Yeah, I'm an educator, as you said. My job is to teach people what they need to know now and in 6 months and in 2 years to stay current in their job and in the technology space. And for the past several years, maybe 3 or 4 years, I've been focused almost exclusively on AI because that's where everyone who's in the workforce is being told to use AI. And my job is to help facilitate and help people figure it out. So I'm deeply embedded in all the conversations around both like how it works, how to integrate it, what is possible, and also where things are headed next. So everywhere from the applied coding level all the way up to like the making decisions on a company basis level. You asked about how I keep myself current. It's really challenging because the AI evolution is happening at an unreasonably high pace, right? It feels at times like you're standing in a river that is constantly moving faster, and you're trying to stop the river for a moment to say, like, what is happening right now? But the river's just moving, and if you go with it, you get screwed because then you're stuck in whatever. And if you stand there, you'll probably get knocked over, and you can't really move forward because everything is coming so fast. So the way to stay on top of it for me is very much looking at what is the intersection between the tools that are being built and when people actually get to use them, and how do they extend our capabilities? Because when you listen to the conversation about AI, a lot of the conversation that's driven from the people that build AI is centered around how can we make AI do the things that people do? And the underlying premise there, of course, is chokehold capitalism, right? You want to remove expensive humans that need like coffee breaks and food and sleep and human rights. And you can replace them with machines that will work 24/7 and cost almost nothing. Of course, a company that only cares about money is going to do that. But right now, what happens is they are being promised that, and then they try to implement it, and it all falls apart because it turns out that the human factor is significant. But then the humans are left with a task, which is a CEO has been convinced of some AI mythology. They tell their staff to implement the AI according to that mythology. And the staff is sitting in the middle going, that is not how anything works. And then they have to be able to not only do their jobs and keep the business running and somehow convince the people that are making decisions that while the grand promise of human replacing AI doesn't exist, there are ways we can use these tools and materials that will help us do our work better, but that requires rethinking how we do things. And that's where I focus my time.
So, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And are you more in the camp of you think that AI currently is overrated, or is it in reality underrated and we are not really grasping the the big effect it will have on how we use digital products?
I think AI is misunderstood and misrepresented. I think a lot of AI, like when we talk about AI in this context, we are really talking about generative AI, which is a tiny portion of what AI actually is. Like, it's a small corner, and the majority of what you hear in the news about AI, where AI actually makes a huge difference. So, like in medicine and in science and in all these other things, none of that is generative AI. That is all these other machine learning things that have, they have similarities, but there's no overlap. They're like, ChatGPT is not inventing new drugs or curing cancer. That is an entirely separate group of tools, and they are independent of language models. So language model development doesn't impact them. They do not impact language models. And within here lies part of the problem, that when we talk about AI, we use anthropomorphized language. So we talk about them as people. And the reason we do that is because, well, part of it is because of the language we chose to use to describe these machines back in the 50s. Part of it is that we've built machines that generate language, and we are hardwired to perceive anything that generates language as a thinking being that projects meaning through language. So when we have a machine that generates language and the machine is mimicking our language and reflecting our language back at us like a mirror, then it's hard not to believe that it is a human being type thing and that it can do human being type things. And then everything derails, because then we forget that, then we start talking about, the AI can think and reason and solve complex problems and come up with ideas. None of these things are factual. Like, none of these things are happening. It looks like they are, but they're not. And we forget that these tools actually have real world use cases that are super important. Language models are amazing interfaces between us and computers, because not only can they process natural language and infer intent from them, but they can hook into computer systems and do things. And if we approach them as interfaces, to say you put a language model between a human and some complex computer system, it allows the human to do much more advanced things without necessarily knowing the technical details. And in that process, we get this transition from humans as input devices for machines to humans as conductors that say, hey, machine, do this thing. The AI then makes the machine do the thing you want, and then the human can look at it and be like, that doesn't sound quite right. Try to play that differently, right? Like, how the conductor stands in front of the orchestra and is like, play this sheet music. And then they play it and it's like, no, that's not right. You did something like over there, change the tempo, whatever. It's the same. Like, the role of the human changes to be far more of a, I understand what the need is, I can use machines to make that happen, then my job is to make the machine work, right?
Interesting, yeah. Now I will ask you, Patricia, how you keep yourself up to date with things, and if you have any tips how you, in a busy working environment, working day, can keep track with what's going on. And after that, I will ask you both about your prediction for this year. What's going to be the biggest advancement? If then any one of our audience has a prediction, you can write it in the chat and we can discuss it here with you as well. But Patricia, you are a podcast host, you are a teacher for AI. How do you find time to explore new things and test new things yourself?
Yeah, and I think that's a wonderful question. Super important. As Morten already said, it's a big challenge. And I absolutely love the analogy of the river. I can't agree more. I think it's very, very important that you don't stand in that river and get floated away, because this is what happens if you don't do anything. I think what you need to do is actually build your own boat and go basically with the river. Use the energy, use it to go forward. But don't swim, that's too exhausting. Build your own boat. And I think the strategies are basically, or the strategies to leverage AI, to learn AI, are basically, like the way how you build your boat. I think for everyone, it's a little bit different how to implement AI, how to learn AI, how to use it. For me, it's mostly three things. The first is I'd really love to dig into research from places like OpenAI, Google DeepMind, also some universities. I really love to check out the industry reports from McKinsey, for example, from Gartner, to understand market trends. And there's a lot out there. I think what is important that you find good sources and then read it. See what the big companies are actually working at. And if this is too much for you, put it in a large language model and ask for a summary. But I think this is super. You don't need to read even the 50 pages. You can leverage AI even by doing that. I think so. Research is the first thing. And then the second thing is, because it's not just research, is setting time apart, I would say each week, maybe each Friday evening, where you experiment with the tools, where you try things out. I know this is very difficult, especially if you're, having a busy schedule, if a lot of things are going on. What I'm doing is I'm blocking my calendar each Friday evening. So when I'm exhausted anyway from the week and I want to do something fun, and then I'm exploring the tools. Some of the tools that maybe some people shared on LinkedIn, that someone sent me, that I would like to experiment. Maybe I'm doing a mini project that I will share on social media later. And this is what I would recommend everyone to explore these tools, to try them out, because there's a lot of talking online about, this is this, but try it out and be curious, but also cautious. This is something that I really love to say. And my tip number 3 is community. Events like this, going to conferences, sharing your thoughts on LinkedIn. Don't use a large language model to write a LinkedIn post with something, like a random topic, but share the learnings. Share your thoughts that you had when you actually read a report or when you tried a tool. And I think this is super, super important, the community aspect, because the truth is that we all don't quite know what's going on. We don't know how the future will look like. We have some predictions, we have some thoughts, and of course, we know where things are headed. But it's very, very important to become part of a community, to share learnings and talk about the things that worked and also things that didn't work in the past, so that we can create a better future. So do research, try out find good sources, experiment, and then be part of a community, share the learnings, and be open. Communicate, talk about the learnings.
Yeah, thanks for sharing so many good advices, because you could easily be overwhelmed by where do I start, even if I set aside time, right? So you mentioned a few
100%.
good things. I myself also use YouTube. Sometimes you have like
Yeah.
10 useful AI tools that are new, and you can just like in 5 minutes get an overview and say, I would like to try this one or this one. Or as you said, visit a conference like the Future Product Days in Copenhagen, where you also will be speaking. Now if our audience has some questions, please use the chat on the right hand side. Just write your questions. I will then interject them. In the meantime, Morten, what's your boldest prediction? What are we going to talk about at the end of this year when it comes to AI? And now everyone is saying agentic AI agents are the big thing. Will that still be the case by the end of the year, or will it be something totally different? What's your opinion?
By the end of the year, dude, by the end of the year, like the aliens will have arrived from outer space, and the comet and the sea creatures. Like, it's impossible to say what's going to happen at the end of the year. I can say that the thing that is currently driving the conversation in AI is agents of any kind, which isn't a new thing, but now we are getting to a point where a lot of the companies are rolling out tools that have the ability to act in the real world in some way. So if we define agent as an AI tool that not only generates content, but can run a loop on itself and can do something to something on its own without a human being involved, then that's the thing that we're going to be talking a lot about. And I think everyone thought that was going to be the big thing for 2025 up until a couple of weeks ago. And then DeepSeek kind of dropped like a big ass rock on everyone's head and disrupted the entire flow of everything by proving, well, 3 major things. So one is that the claim that the big AI companies have been making since day one, that building AI models is extremely, like, requires unending amounts of data, that it requires enormously complex processing power, and that it is incredibly expensive. Those three things were invalidated by DeepSeek. And DeepSeek not only published models that rival OpenAI and Anthropic's models, but they also published all the papers on how to do it. And they published the models open source, which means a bunch of other companies are now taking everything DeepSeek did, including all their new strategies, and baking them into their own systems. And they're able to build their own models using far lower power systems with existing data instead. Now, within this conversation, there's a bunch of questions around things like, if you distill the model from an existing model, are you actually building something new? Aren't you just baking in every bias and decision that was in the original model into your new one? What happens when you are when everyone has a chance of building their own model or fine-tuning their model? Are we just going to end up with a series of models that are all like hyper opinionated in specific genres, and people choose their own reality based on what model they're using? Those things are all real problems, and I think this year we're going to have that experience again and again and again, because we're hitting a point where we now have model ubiquity. So, like, between OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Meta, Mistral, and Cohere, and now also XAI, we have a huge collection of models. Oh, right, and DeepSeek, and a couple other Chinese ones that have come out since. All these models perform at the same level, and the difference in performance quality is so minor that it's not actually relevant to the user, even at an enterprise level. It's like you can use either of them. It's almost like pick your flavor of coffee. And at that point, the next question is, how do you pick the model? What do you do with the model? And what does that do to the ecosystem, right? Because if OpenAI is no longer the lead, or they don't get as much money, who becomes the lead? If, say, Elon Musk decides to create a very truthful model that bases all its answers on the right-wing echo chamber, also known as X, that lives in the dead carcass of Twitter, then, and puts that into the market, which he did yesterday, and says that that thing is as good or better than OpenAI's models or Anthropic's models, then you'll get an entire subgenre of the human population that will start using an AI model that has a very strong political purpose, which is to further a fascist project into the world, right? And the people who use it will be convinced that this thing is a neutral arbiter of reality and truth, whereas people will then counter that by building other models that lean in other political directions. So we'll get a shattering of the marketplace with a lot of different models, where people get to pick and choose. We'll have a lot of uncertainty around which models do what best and how to incorporate them in a proper way. And we'll get a rise of new companies and countries that ship models that will create a really interesting space where there are no real guardrails and no one is in control of what is happening. So it'll be chaotic. And then agents play into this, but I think that explosion of open models and open weight models will become the thing that really defines this year.
Yeah, I actually agree, and it's going to lead to some very serious questions for all societies, how to deal with it, and how we can still live on one planet when we have these totally different bubbles. That's going to be interesting to see, to say the least. Yeah. Thank you for this very thorough answer. And we have two questions. I would like to give both of them to Patricia, so combine them a little bit. The one question is from Elaine. She asks about sustainability. What do you think the impact on the environment, on AI has on the sustainability aspect, and if that still will play a role in the future, or do you think we have been past the point where the peak point is behind us, where people are interested in sustainability, or will that still play a major role in your opinion? And the second question, I will remind you if you forget it, is about open source versus closed models. Do you think that like DeepSeek now with the open model will force major companies to open up as well? If you start with the first part, the sustainability part, what do you think about that, Patricia?
I think that's a super important question. So thank you so much for asking that, for bringing that up. I think we actually don't talk enough about sustainability and AI. This is something that unfortunately a lot of companies and people don't talk about. The reason for it is that it's not very sexy for the big companies, neither for Meta, neither for OpenAI. I say it as it is, they don't care. They don't care because they want to make money. So I think to be transparent and to think about the future, what is absolutely necessary is that we as users, we as designers, we as people working in tech, advocate for sustainability, for sustainable practices, for making things more sustainable, and hopefully at some point get to a point where we have certain laws, regulations that define also the energy use and these kind of things. Because I'm a little bit worried about the future when it comes to sustainability and with everything that's going on with AI, because the companies, they don't care. They are not, we, even if we wanted, they won't change a thing if they don't need to. The same problem that we have with accessibilities. Companies don't care because the minority of people is actually like using these accessibility functions. So what happens are accessibility laws and regulations now in the EU and in Europe, which is great. And this is what we need for AI. We need regulations, but worldwide regulations, not only for the EU. We already have lots of regulations. They don't focus on sustainability, but I think this is what we need. And to get to that point, we need people who advocate for it, who first of all explain and educate the minority of people why AI is not sustainable, talk about ways how could we make this more sustainable, and help people to be aware, because most people are still overwhelmed with AI. They don't know what's going on. They're scared of their jobs. So then they don't even think about the sustainability aspect. So I think thanks for raising that question. We need to be cautious. I think it's also in our responsibility to advocate for it, to educate, and to talk about it. So everyone who's listening, share your thoughts on LinkedIn, talk about it, and start the discussion. Because if we don't do it, the big tech companies are definitely not going to do that. That's for sustainability. And the second question with open source. I mean, I don't really know. I am not seeing OpenAI becoming open source or all the other tech or large language models. I don't think so, but I also don't know. It might be a sign that things are opening up, but I don't really know. So I have to be completely honest, no idea if this is a trigger or if other companies are going to follow the lead. I don't think so. From my experience, especially OpenAI, they are very cautious when it comes to their training data. They are not very transparent when it comes to a lot of things. So I don't see them becoming open source. But let's see what happens. My prediction is probably not. But let's see. Morten, what do you say?
So on the sustainability part, AI, generative AI and the explosion of use of generative AI came at a most inopportune time, because we as the world had just gotten to the point where the conversation about the energy use of crypto was having a significant impact on crypto policy, where the politicians were like, first they thought that crypto was like the greatest thing ever and that blockchain should be everywhere, and then over time they were like, actually it's all just crime, and also it's horribly bad for the environment, so we should not do this. And they started regulating energy use from crypto companies. And I remember there were countries where they were like specifically targeting crypto farms and saying you can't do this, and it resulted in like some crypto entrepreneurs buying abandoned coal plants and stuff and starting up their own production of energies to mine crypto. Then AI came and used the same type of processors and the same energy, but to do something that looks like it has more societal value and utility. And the entire conversation about energy use just vanished. And part of that is because of the political landscape we're in. Not in the left-right political landscape, but more in the everyone in power has a feeling of everyone else being on the cusp of doing something that will outcompete them. So no matter what country you're in, the politicians are in panic mode because they're afraid of being outcompeted by whoever they think is their enemy. And as a result, when a technology comes that looks like it could give someone a massive advantage over other people, they feel like the only thing they can do is to pour as much money and energy into it to stay competitive. And in that process, the environment always gets shafted because the environment is this like externality that we don't think about immediately, and we don't see climate change happening on an hourly basis. You see it happening on like a 5 to 10 year time span, which is longer than people are able to process. So they just notice slight changes over time. And it's a huge problem because in addition to the energy use that AI has, the people who are marketing AI are using the potential of AI to help us build a better energy future as an argument to promote the kind of AI that they benefit from. But that type of AI isn't the one that's going to help build a better energy future. Like language models are not going to solve nuclear fusion or help us build. It's possible that a scientist who uses language model as part of their work will work slightly faster with a language model, but that's not what's going to change the development of nuclear fusion. What's going to change the development of nuclear fusion is like machine learning inside other math systems that have nothing to do with generative AI and who don't use that much energy. But this mythology combined with this promise that we will get to a point where we have all these fantastic green technologies and we can solve all the world's problems using with the help of AI makes people forget that the energy transition we need to make globally, like locally in every country, but also globally, is a 10 to 50 year project. Because energy transition also means upgrading the entire energy grid, which is massively outdated and underscaled for what we have currently. We can't just build a nuclear plant of any kind and plug it into the energy grid now because the energy grid is overloaded. So any new energy put into the grid crashes the system. So you can't, right? I know because we put solar panels on our house. And we can only put 120% of what we use. So like we can produce 20% more per year than you use. The reason for that is if we overproduce energy in our house, it's an added load onto the energy system. Even though we're contributing back into the system, we add a load to a system that's already overtaxed, and and if a lot of people do it, they'll take the system down. So to fix the energy problem, we need to rewire the entire world with new cables, which requires politicians going to the companies that do that and say, hey, you need to upgrade your system. And then they will say, but who's going to pay for that? And then the public says, why is my energy prices going up? And meanwhile, the AI companies are like, we're just going to spin up entirely separate energy grids to power AI for development purposes. And then magically, somehow we will solve the energy crisis. But for now, we're just going to use as much energy as possible. So it's a very complex situation where AI is being treated as something that is separate from everything else and also an inevitability that must happen, rather than as part of a larger political plan around how we deal with the problems we are facing in the world. And I'll say this, because this is something that people don't realize, and I didn't realize until someone pointed it out to me. The problem of AI usage and energy is also the problem of the internet using energy, right? If you watch Netflix, you're using an unspeakable amount of energy to stream a video on the internet into your TV or phone or whatever you're using. And the same with any other video platform, TikTok, YouTube, whatever. The amount of energy spent watching video online is extraordinary. And it happens many places at the same time, all the way from the whatever service you're using through the ISP network in your router all the way to your house. And compared to watching a DVD, it is like 1,000,000 times more energy, right? We have built ourselves a society where we assume that energy is something that just exists, that is just available at any time. And we're right at the cusp where that will no longer be the case because the energy networks will start breaking down. And then we add AI to the equation and make people more dependent on these external services that use even more energy. So we're facing a crisis here that already existed that is worsened by AI. And we have an industry that's trying to make people more dependent on the services that are making this problem worse, right? And it ties to open source because the open source models, one of the very interesting things they do is they allow you to host smaller models on your own devices. And what a lot of people who are using AI or building tools with AI are realizing is it's very expensive for them to have their customers interact with a third party. Because if you're being charged per token and you have 100,000 users and they're all chatting with some AI system, you're paying millions of dollars to some third party for pointless conversations, right? So it's better for companies to integrate local models they control, or even more likely ship the model to the consumer so they run the model on their own device, which will lead to the companies preferring smaller models that are highly customized, that are very specific task-oriented models that can be packaged into software. And we're starting to see that happen around the open source tools. So like there was a news story this weekend that you can now put a language model on a USB stick and then stick it into your computer. And then suddenly you have a local LLM that will run on whatever software you want, and you can carry it with you. And that's the kind of innovation you'll get from open source. And I think that we'll see more of that, where people think more of AI not as a service they get from somewhere else, but more of a thing that's integrated into things. And this will reduce some of the energy problem because it requires us to think about making the smaller models. But it's a very small solution to a gigantic monster of a problem that we're not addressing.
Yeah, it's fantastic how you touch on so many complex issues in such a short amount of time. But yeah, it's all true, and the energy usage is amazing. How this is even possible, because we haven't changed the wires in our homes, and it's still working somehow. But there must be the
For
limit at some
now.
point. For now, yeah. Now we talked about the impact on society and sustainability. Now, finally, at the end of this conversation, I would like to shift the focus on the impact on the individual, in specific, the impact on user experience designers, product designers, researchers. Patricia, do you think now, when the United States is saying they're investing so much money into AI, at least they say they will, the European Union has come out and said we're going to have this huge conference in Paris and invest so much money in it. China is doing it. Will AI skills become a factor on the job market now, seen from the perspective from a UX designer, product designer? And what kind of skills do you see become important, if you have any foresight on that?
Sure. From my experience, we are already seeing that. So when people are hiring at the moment, AI skills are already required. If people are looking for designers at the moment who don't know what AI is, how to use it, and how to maybe like implement them in their workflows, they're definitely looking for the wrong people. I think AI is still underrated, and a lot of people don't understand the impact it will have on all industries, especially designers. I think a lot of designers are understanding how important it is to really dive and dig deep into how to use AI. Because companies are already using AI for many, many different parts of the workflow. And for designers, AI opens a lot of new opportunities and possibilities, which are, for me, very, very exciting. We as designers have a lot of repetitive tasks, especially when it comes to user research, going through data, writing summaries, analysis, synthesizing, all these kind of things. And AI is a great partner in doing so. Big trend that I'm seeing is AI is moving a little bit from like just doing the repetitive task, like writing an email here and there on ChatGPT, to becoming an assistant, a partner that you use basically on every step of the process. It doesn't mean that it will replace you. It doesn't mean that it takes your job. It just means that you are you have this partner by your side to become a better designer, a better version. And the truth is, I think if designers especially are not skilling up and leveling up, understanding AI, using AI, they definitely will be replaced by people who will, because they have so much more capacity to do things. I think it's absolutely fascinating. You know, I'm self-employed, so I'm running my own design studio. And for the last 1.5 years, I'm heavily using AI for almost everything. You know, I build GPTs for every part of the process. And for me, it's absolutely fascinating how much more I get done and how much better the quality is that I am producing for my clients, for consultancy work, for doing workshops, for anything. And I think everyone can do that. The only thing that we need to do is start using AI. And don't be a blocker, say like, this is not going to get me anywhere, and all these kind of things. I think there are skills where I won't be as good, you know, like critical thinking, everything around emotions, empathy, creativity somehow. But there are a lot of things where I can be a huge help. So I think it's absolutely essential to dive into it. Now is basically your last chance to ride this wave. Otherwise, the river is coming and like throwing you under the water, and you know, you will probably never see the land again. So dive into AI. It's very easy. I already shared the 3 tips that I have, and dive into it. Use these tools. If you're not allowed in your company surrounding, start with personal projects. Do a course on AI. Listen to podcasts. There are also books out there that you can read. YouTube is free. You know, go there, watch a YouTube tutorial if you don't want to spend any money. But if you don't do that, then please don't complain in like 2 or 3 years that you're out of your job. Because a lot of people use these years to skill up and to level up. I think this is super important, and I want UX still be at the forefront of products and be a part of all these conversations. And to do so, we need to have some skills and understand what's really going on.
Interesting. And you mentioned podcasts. So one of the podcast options is your own one, The Future of UX.
Of course.
And it's also on Spotify. So if
Have a
anyone
listen.
hasn't heard about it yet, check it out.
So Patricia, you should answer the question in the chat that says, is UX dead? And if so, how should I transition from 2020's UX to 2025's age?
Yes.
I love that question. I get that asked a lot. UX is definitely not dead. UX has never been more alive because someone needs to design these agents. Someone needs, so like UX is changing. We are not going to design user flows, static screens, but now we are designing about the experience itself, something that we always wanted to do. You know, less pixel pushing and more thinking about the experience, understanding behaviors, understanding people, and then thinking, how do people interact with systems, with problems? What are their needs and goals? So this gets suddenly much more strategic and much more fun. And so leave all the stuff behind, like the UI design, Figma, and all these things. This is not how the future will look like. UX is not dead. It's very important that we have UX designers, and I am seeing a wonderful future for UX designers because someone needs to design these systems. And I don't see other departments doing that because it's very, very, very complex. You need to have a lot of different skills, and UX designers are perfect for it. So don't worry. Don't change your dedication. Stay a UX designer, but skill up a little bit and understand what's going on. I can highly recommend my podcast, actually. I don't want to like promote it too much, but I'm going to upload an episode about the topic, the future of UX and how to skill up in the next couple of weeks. I recorded it actually today. So make sure to listen to it because I think don't be scared, be curious, but also a little bit cautious. And I think if you have that mindset, you will get very, very far.
Because there will always be users and there will always be experiences. So both the U and the X will prevail. Exactly.
Yeah. Maybe it will a little bit different. Maybe then it's not UX anymore. Maybe it's then agentic experiences, or it will be called a little bit different, but it will be the same, you know? So as you said, always be people. Yeah.
So if I'm a designer or researcher today, and I want to really make sure that I'm like my AI skills are where they should be. So trying these tools is one thing and very important, as you mentioned. Do you agree, Morten? Is this the best thing I can do other than, of course, going on LinkedIn Learning and signing up for some courses? Are there any? What would you suggest if I wanted to hone my AI skills? What can I do?
I think everything Patricia said is true. All of it. The underlying message there is that the value of human work remains human work, and we are not designing tools for machines. We are designing tools for people, and only people understand what people need. So one of the key aspects of transitioning into this AI-powered world and AI-powered workplace is to understand how AI fits in and where it doesn't fit. And I focus a lot on helping people see where the human factor matters. Because a lot of the work that we've been doing for since the beginning of time really has been as machines that are doing things to achieve a goal, where we end up spending a lot of time doing the thing that needs to happen for a goal to be achieved. And automation has always been about trying to figure out anywhere where we can take that labor away from a person so they can do the thing they're actually looking to do instead of doing the pre-work to make it work, right? And with computers, what you see is, let's say an accountant as an example. A majority of the work an accountant does isn't knowing tax law and making sure that the right money goes to the right place and all that stuff. The main part of what they're doing is inputting information into forms, checking that the information is correct, then checking again, then making sure it's the right form, then doing like a bunch of very tedious machine work. And it's just that we don't have the machines to do this properly, right? When you get an AI into that system, you can take the machine, the work where the human acts like a machine out and let the human focus on the stuff that they actually want to do, which is thinking about, is this the right way to do it? Is there an opportunity here to do something else? And that applies to almost every industry where when you think about AI, instead of saying, we will use AI to do X, you say, I am trying to do X. Where can I use AI to make it easier or faster or more accurate or less labor intensive so that I can focus more on the thing that I'm trying to do? And this is a key difference. And I see this especially when I consult with startups, because there's this clear difference between startups that start out by saying, we want to build AI to do whatever, and the startups that say, we have a business idea. How do we use AI to make this happen? And the difference is, the first example has no actual idea about how to do things in the world. They just want to use AI. And the second one has an idea of how to do something in the world and are looking for the best way of doing it. That way of thinking changes things, because that means when your boss comes and says, pour AI on everything to make it better, that is, AI is a magical tool that will do things, instead of, we have a purpose with our business and we're trying to meet that purpose in the best way possible. And being able to explain that difference and then bring it into the culture of your company becomes an essential skill. And that requires understanding not only what the AIs can do, but where the limits are. And a lot of those limits are vague, because a lot of the time the AI looks like it can do something, and on a cursory glance, it is able to do it, but the quality of the work it's doing is not great. For example, I write software all the time. AI tools, including AI agents, are an enormous help for software developers. However, because of the way language models are built, they reinforce old standards and practices. And software development moves really fast because trends change and also because the languages change. And these models are incapable of baking in new standards because they are trained once and they can't learn anything new. And to add new information, you have to retrain the entire model. So if you're using, say, GitHub Copilot and you write code, the code will be correct and work, but it will be old code. And it'll be hard to maintain because the standards shift. And the only way to fix that, well, first of all, you as a developer need to know this so that you can look at the code and be like, oh, it's doing the wrong thing, or this is an old way of doing it. And then you have to intervene and say, hey, no, we're not doing it this way. Here's the new documentation that we're going to use instead. And the AI is mostly able to follow that, but it requires your intervention. And then you have to be able to verify that it's actually doing the work the right way, because it can easily do the work in an unnecessarily complex way, or add a feature that isn't necessary, or do some sort of extra step that costs more money because it's just mimicking existing patterns. So what you're starting to see now is, for example, with GitHub Copilot, you can now get extensions to it. And the extensions are basically lookup services. So if you're making a Docker container, which is like a thing that all developers do, the code GitHub Copilot outputs is old and incorrect. But you can't, Docker, the company, can't go to GitHub and be like, retrain your model. That's not going to happen. So they build an extension. So when you're working with Docker, you would open Copilot and say @Docker. And then anytime you're doing something, it goes and queries Docker's database for examples and brings that in and incorporates it into your example. So instead of me doing that and going and copying and pasting the stuff over, the extension does that. But for me to be able to do that, I need to know that this is necessary, which means my skill has to be higher than it was before, because I'm not writing the code anymore. I am reviewing the code and making sure it's on standard. And this applies to every industry. Our human skills now have to be higher in the expertise level we are working on, so that we can help the AIs do the work properly. So we're basically becoming like oversight managers and senior managers of AI systems that just do the grudge work. So the human value is actually more important than ever. And that's not even talking about like, when you build a tool, you need to understand the human being at the other end and how they interact with it. So most AI services and tools lack one essential thing: a service designer. No one in AI thinks about service design. They just make these shitty chatbots that are impossible to use and are like endlessly chatty. And no one thought like, is it meaningful to introduce a chatbot in this like high stress situation? Or should you just give people a button they can push to solve the problem, right? There's a lack of service designers in this entire space, and service design is going to become hugely important. And UX people are like almost there. So just take a course in service design and then you're there.
Yeah, right. Patricia, we have time for one last question from our audience. And so if you could give a quick answer on this, because we're reaching our time limit. Which part of your UX work does AI help you with the most? Asks Aline.
Also, I think a wonderful question. I would say generally it's everything involved: copy, text, and data. And if you have a look at the design process, there's a lot of text involved, there's a lot of data involved. Like for me, in each project, we're doing research. We analyze data. We do testing, usually on a weekly basis, maybe even more. And someone needs to, first of all, prepare all of that, come up with the insights, the features, the problems. This is something that you can do without AI, so you don't need that. But you can use AI to help you prep for the interviews, do easy things like write a discussion guideline, then transcribe the video recordings, analyze them, get a summary, synthesize them, then prepare a presentation that you share with your stakeholders, with your team. Of course, you need an oversight, and of course, you sometimes need to do some changes and iterations, 100%, but you can use AI for most of those things, and this is super helpful. This is the first thing. The second thing is also prototyping and creating visuals. My part, I am doing a lot of like consultancy work. I'm involved in a lot of like futuristic innovation projects. And for that, we need a lot of visuals. We need to create prototypes. And I'm not just talking about building a prototype with UiSart, for example, which, this is an AI prototyping tool. It's nice, it's fun, but it's more about visualizing ideas. And for those, I think like Midjourney or also like the video creation tools, like ideation tools with prompts, are amazing. I think they're really changing the game of how to get your ideas across, because this is still a really big challenge, I think, for designers. They have an idea, and then they need to convince, and they need to get this idea across. They need to explain how it works, how it will look like, how it will feel like. And all these tools are so helpful to visualize ideas very easily. If you're not a graphic designer, if you're not an illustrator, if you're not really good with Photoshop, you just enter a prompt, you create a visual, and you put this in a presentation that helps so much to really articulate your ideas and design decisions. And number 3 is all around copy, right? So doing presentations, writing emails, coming up with any kind of summaries. So I think there are a million ways to use AI, maybe even more than I just mentioned. But yeah, a lot of opportunities, and I think very, very exciting for designers.
Yeah, very interesting perspective. Thank you for answering that question. We've been talking for an hour now. It went like 10 minutes. So thank you everybody for watching. And if you want to take a deep dive into AI and product design, then join us in Copenhagen in September at the Future Product Days. Both Patricia and Morten will be there together with 60 other world-class speakers. Go info at futureproductdays.com and see the program. We'll talk about AI. We'll have a lot of workshops. We'll have a big trance concert. So hope to see you all there. And a big thank you to Morten and Patricia for joining us this evening.
Thank
and
you.
for
Thanks for having
answering
us.
the questions. And if you like, you can stay 5 or 10 minutes in the lobby and networking, do it with virtual networking. Thank you everyone for coming. Nice to see you, and take care.
Thank you all. Have a good evening and
Yeah.
good day for you,
Thank
Morten,
you.
which is still there.